Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nichecast. I am the Diggity Doodah Doc, living it up in a big fat suitcase, joined by the Wiggly Wobbly Wildcard, and we are here to present to you a Nichecast episode, somewhat revolving around the organism, the planet that is Blackcaps. It's a weird old planet. It's one of those planets that isn't, like, on the surface everything looks honkadory, but there's a bit too much carbon dioxide, I think, in the atmosphere of this planet. How about that for a Monday morning wildcard?
Sounds a lot like our planet.
Maybe planet Earth is the best example for planet Blackcaps, given the abundance on planet Earth and like the worldwide reputation of the Blackcaps. They're fairly similar.
So does that make Gavin Larson like Monsanto or one of those big ass companies that are, or BP or something, like sneakily destroying the climate and pretending that they're not? And justifying it with just like mindlessly stupid reasons.
One could draw those correlations. Well, good. We are on Patreon, so support the Niche Cache on Patreon. The best way to support the Niche Cache is on Patreon, so hit that up. And if you like what we're doing, comparing the Blackcaps to planets, maybe you're the type of person who should be supporting the Niche Cache on Patreon as we keep it weird and funky. We will get on some Blackcaps chat. Their World Cup squad was dropped sometime last week, amongst a whole lot of dramatic leaks and all sorts of investigative reporting from a few outlets that pretty much just said the same thing as each other, and then the same thing as the New Zealand cricket release only a day before, so there was no real need for the leaks because we could just wait another 24 hours, but who cares? Wildcard, you've been dreaming of climbing large rock structures.
Yeah, dreams of the nightmare variety though. Do you know who Alex Honnold is? Do you know who that is?
I do indeed. He has released a new little documentary movie about climbing large rock structures.
He has. He's done a couple podcasts and stuff like that as well. He's a pretty interesting dude. He's got this movie out about him called Free Solo, which is free soloing is a type of rock climbing where you're basically just no ropes, just all on your own, hands and feet. See how far you can get. And this dude is the best in the world at it. And he free soloed El Capitan in America, which is this just basically massive, disgustingly terrifying, but in its own way extraordinarily beautiful, just sheer rock cliff face. And he climbed the bastard all by himself, just hands and feet, no equipment to hold him back, no ropes. Just at times he's dangling over this thing. Oh man, it's 3,000 feet tall, which is what I don't know. That's got to be the best part of close to a kilometer upwards, and it took him, I think, just under 4 hours to do. Oh man, this movie won the best documentary Oscar, and ordinarily every single Oscar they hand out is just frivolous and pointless, but this one seems to have hit the money because this is about the scariest movie I've ever seen. And I'm not the best with heights. I'm not phobic or anything, but I'm still not entirely comfortable, and I'm not on my own 2 feet on the odd solid ground. So watching this film, watching this dude just climb, and they've cut it in a lot with some stuff about his personality and how he's this kind of driven, almost kind of callous guy at times. He's not the most emotional and all these things. And they did this brain scan at one point and showed the part of the brain that registers fear. His is almost, it's not non-existent. It's just it's got such a high threshold. It's okay, well, I guess this is how this guy's able to do what he does. and it's interspersed with a lot of stuff about his relationship with his girlfriend, who's kind of like hanging on every word that he says, and he's just like, I mean, if you watch the film, he's actually like a little bit of a dick at times, and it's kind of funny. It's a pretty brilliantly made documentary, but when you get to the bit about him just climbing the rock face, and there's like a part where he has to like, there's this tiny little like an inch wide bit where he's got to put his entire body weight on his right foot leaning up against this thing. If he slips, he dies. Like, it's as simple as that. And he's got to do this big old karate kick thing to catch his foot like square on the ridge next to it, and then he's got to somehow grip this thing with his right hand and put his entire body weight on the pressure of his left foot, which is like out perpendicular to him, and his hand, and crawl across the thing to get a hand within that little like ridge so he can pull himself up that way. Like, there's just these, and you know he made it, is the crazy thing. You know, if he died, the movie wouldn't have been released. I've seen him on, like, I think he went on Joe Rogan's podcast. I saw him on that one, so it's not like I didn't know how it ended, but just the tense, like how tense it was, the tension of the whole thing. I tell you what, I've seen some scary movies, but that's about the scariest. And we talk a lot about sporting feats on this podcast. I got to be honest, I think that's right up there with the most impressive things I've ever seen.
You are aware that a couple of times on Game of Thrones, like, people have climbed the wall. Like, it's not that crazy. I mean, the wall's made of ice and magic, and people are climbing that like every couple of 100 years. So,
but that's not quite as tall,
isn't it?
I would suggest the wall is probably 300 or 400 meters tall. It would be my theory. Although made of ice, so slippery as sure, but then you never know. I'm sure there's plenty of ridges to grab onto, and I'm also sure they probably had like daggers or something to wedge in, and you know, a little bit of assistance. I doubt they free soloed the wall, because like, why would you?
Well, if winter's coming, like, you've got a pretty good reason to.
Yeah, if winter's coming, you're not taking any chances. You bring in all the pickaxes and whatever that you can. Ropes, all of the sorts. They had ropes when the wild men climbed it.
Well, I'm getting sweaty palms right now, so probably best we move on to some Blackcaps discussion. Is that one of the most compelling kind of documentary things you've watched recently?
I would say it is. I mean, the point at which it's sort of like interesting and quite theoretical up until the point where he's actually like legit climbing it, and then it's just like fingers gripping like white knuckles. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one to sit through. Enjoyable though. I mean, if a documentary can get that kind of visceral reaction, then you know it's doing the right thing.
Fair play. Blackcaps, we've got a World Cup squad wildcard, and
speaking of visceral reactions,
well, that's where I want to start, because we have this selection of Mr. Blundell, Tom Blundell, as they call him in the streets, and you've just fired a few shots at Gavin Larson. You've mentioned visceral reaction, and this is kind of my conundrum, because on the one hand, selecting Tom Blundell really doesn't matter. Like, it's a preparing for a worst case scenario. So yeah, like, I can talk my way into saying how shit that is, because if a worst case scenario takes place, Tom Latham gets injured, you can just give Henry Nichols the gloves or whatever, and it's a worst case scenario, so it's not it's not ideal, but you just deal with it, and then that extra squad place can be taken up by a Doug Bracewell, a Will Young even, or Todd Astle. Like, why not just put Todd Astle in the squad as well? So you've got a couple of options. So it's like, it's this weird situation, let alone the complete lack of planning around Tom Blundell. So you've got this, like, it's highly unlikely Tom Blundell plays absolutely no role in the World Cup. But his selection, I believe what you're alluding to, has sparked a visceral reaction.
His selection has this one other major selection as well, which is Sodhi getting in over Todd Astle. And between those two, I mean, I'm not sure what the thing is with Tim Seifert, because they said he was injured, but they also read he was going to be back before the World Cup, so it's a little bit weird. And if you're going to pick a wicketkeeper batsman as your backup, preferring someone who is good with the gloves, then there are some pretty good glove men who actually play one-day cricket during the season. Tom Blundell played, one game this season, I think, in the Ford Trophy. Like, he's not exactly the dude who's out there laying it down. But, like you said, he's just not going to play. And I've seen people saying that that's a lot to ask of Tom Latham, but I'm not sure that it really is. I mean, there's, a couple days in between every game. He's going to get a rest. He's going to have to, keep wicket for a lot of games consecutively, but Trent Bolt's going to have to bowl a lot of overs in a lot of games consecutively. Kane Williamson's going to have to do the same batting. Ross Taylor as well. Ross Taylor's 35 years old. It's a little hard on him to go out there and smack 50s and 100s every single game, but he's still going to go out there and do that. Like, there's not going to be much rotation during the World Cup, so I don't think that's much of a deal. And yeah, Tom Blundell's just plain and simple not really going to play. So he's the 15th man out of 15th men. So I'm just like, yes, it's another example of just a weird Blackcap selection, but for me personally, it's balanced out pretty much completely by the fact that they saw sense in the leg spinning option and picked the guy who will actually take wickets over the guy who might score you 20 off 15 balls not out at the end of the innings, batting at number 9 or 8 in what's probably going to be an inconsequential innings anyway, and won't get you wickets. And this suggestion that also, we'll probably talk about this particular battle later on, but the suggestion that Todd Astle versus Ish Sodhi was a matter of, can you get 4 for 60, or would you rather none for 45? And I'm thinking, well, that's cute if you think Todd Astle can go none for 45 against like England or India or Australia at the World Cup. But yeah, nah, I'm just happy they've picked that, like, the guy who can actually affect a game. And if Tom Blundell has to be there as the balance, because of course we can never get a perfectly logical Blackcap squad, I'm kind of cool with that. I think this is as close to the right, my idea of what the right one is, and everyone's got a different opinion, but the right Blackcap squad for this World Cup, as close as we can expect, I guess, is the point.
Yeah,
as close as we have any right to expect.
There's a lot to deconstruct, unpack in your little
there is
rant there. There's starting with this idea of who is the best wicketkeeper, and it's like we as domestic fans, like domestic cricket fans, we've got no idea. And anyone who mentions like catches or number of stumpings or as a reference to the quality of the wicketkeeper is the most redundant statistical reference, because that pretty much almost wholly relies on the bowler.
Yeah, that's quality of bowling you're talking about.
Yeah, so if you're getting a lot of catches, that's probably because the bowler's bowling well, not necessarily because you're a better wicketkeeper than the other wicketkeeper. So we just have to rely on who they say is the best wicketkeeper, and they're saying Tom Blundell is the best wicketkeeper with the gloves, other than BJ Watling, who is obviously the Test wicketkeeper. But even that, like, is a couple of minute differences, and it's minute. Like, I'm not buying that Tom Blundell is astronomically better wicket keeping than Tim Seifert, Dane Cleaver, Cameron Fletcher, Glenn Phillips even. Like, I'm not buying that one of those dudes is a lot better than the others at wicket keeping. They are all wicket keeping for their provinces, other than Glenn Phillips, who dabbles and chops and changes. But yeah, the idea that someone is so much better than the others that he commands selection based on his wicketkeeping is a bit weird. However, none of us really know, so that's just an idea to throw up there. In terms of Ish Sodhi and Todd Astle, I've got no thought that Todd Astle, is a reliable international ODI batsman or leg spinner. We mentioned it before, like, if we're batting in 8 or 9 or 10, Ish Sodhi is just as capable as Todd Astle at doing what is required in that role. Like, Ish Sodhi is going to come out and try and hit boundaries. Todd Astle, to be honest, Ish Sodhi has shown more in terms of hitting boundaries in international or T20 cricket. So he's shown more in hitting boundaries at the highest level in this format than Todd Astle. So the idea that Todd Astle's a better batsman than Ish Sodhi, well, you need to take in their roles that have come in late in the innings and hit boundaries. And Ish Sodhi is as good at Todd Astle at that role. So that's a weird one. But that develops into the conversation about Ish Sodhi and Todd Astle being in the same team. And that rolls into the conversation of how are the Blackcaps going to win this World Cup? And my gut feel is that they are going to need as many weapons and as many options as possible. Because I don't think they are a good enough team to just come in with a stock standard team, pretty much of a squad of 14, and defeat the world's best teams, kinda in part because we have no idea what the best 11 is. So if they're going to go through a World Cup, they have to suss out what's going to work, who's going to do the job. They're going to have to tinker with their lineup depending on their opposition as well. So with that in mind, it's the idea that Tom Blundell is just taking up a spot when that spot could be better used by someone who can actually add to the squad, which is where having either Todd Astle or Doug Bracewell in the squad, along with Ish Sodhi, along with Mitchell Santner with regards to Todd Astle, for Doug Bracewell, selecting him in the squad along with Jimmy Neesham and anyone else. Then you have 15 players who can all contribute, and you have so much flexibility in how you roll out that team. And who's to say that Jimmy Neesham's going to come out guns blazing at the World Cup? We've got no idea of that. The Champions Trophy wasn't exactly, to the best of my memory, this is coming straight off the top of the dome, the Champions Trophy wasn't exactly a stellar period of Jimmy Neesham's career. There's little point of reference for Jimmy Neesham to perform consistently at the World Cup. So maybe you just want a few options. Maybe Ish Sodhi or Mitchell Santner doesn't prove to be effective in the first few games, and then you can come in with Todd Astle just to change things up and prepare your team, because you're going to play every team at the World Cup. It's a long World Cup. You're going to need options, and then you can bring in Todd Astle. You can rotate your bowling attack more so that for the bigger games, the games you got to win, the games that you know are going to be maybe more difficult, you're sorted, you're sussed, you're ready to go. But it just seems like the Blackcaps squad just lacks that little bit of extra firepower, and I think it's something specific for this Blackcaps team, because the most important thing here is that no one knows the best first 11. Whereas a lot of other teams have their first 11 with maybe one or two changes that can be made. The Blackcaps first 11 is completely up in the air. And on top of that, man for man, talent for talent, the Blackcaps just don't really have the firepower of the other nations, so they are going to need to suss out different combinations and really hone in on what can be effective. So it's something like selecting Todd Astle and Ish Sodhi in the same squad, and then figuring out which leg spinner can be most effective in those conditions on that stage. For me, that just feels like a better option than selecting someone who's not going to do anything.
Yeah, I got a couple thoughts on that. The first one is that I sort of think just the way the summer rolled out, where there was this weirdness between who's going to play between Sodhi and Astle, and then Astle comes in, but then Astle doesn't play, and then Sodhi continues to dominate at Plunket Shield level, and then Astle, misses out on the World Cup squad. And I sort of think that with the way those two were almost pitted against each other, like a bloody Colosseum duel or something like that, I think just for the sake of each other's clarity of role, it's probably useful that only one of them goes. But I see what you're saying, because I think if that was the same situation, I would have taken the guy you mentioned as the guy I would have taken as Doug Bracewell as an extra option, an extra genuine like seam bowling option, not just a pop gun all rounder like a few of the other ones that they've got hovering around the scene and have done for the last 40 years. And Gavin Larson was one of them back in his day. I think Doug Bracewell can be a genuine. He could open the bowling if he needed to, and he can bat better than his batting at international level has always been overrated. But I think at this point, like, he wouldn't bat higher than 8, so he can certainly do a job there as well as.
Quick question: Is
go for it.
Doug Bracewell a better international batsman than Todd Astle?
That's a funny one, because both of them have been talked up for their batting in a way where it's like, well, can we see it before we have to believe it, And I'm not sure we've ever seen it from either of them, but Bracewell has at least hinted at it, and he's had more opportunities, so it's not really fair on Astle to say this, but I think you probably would lean towards Bracewell there, wouldn't you?
Well, I lean towards Douglas in every aspect of cricket,
yeah.
So that's a kind of silly question.
Sure. The second thing that I'm leading into with that is that if Tom Latham, comes out batting at, what is he probably going to bat at 5 in the World Cup, comes out first game, gets, I don't know who we're playing, but whoever they are, their fastest bowlers having a bit of a crack, drops a short one in, Latham drops back onto his back foot, reaches up to block that thing, cops it right on the thumb, breaks his thumb, out for the tournament. If that situation happens, it might be a case of Blundell has to play the, Henry Nicholls would probably have to take the gloves for the rest of that game, but I expect maybe Blundell might get the go for the next one, maybe even the game after that, but I'm pretty sure what would happen if Latham was ruled out is that someone like Seifert would be called up as an injury replacement, and if that did happen, I expect someone like Seifert would then play the rest of the games once they're there and available, and probably I expect he'll find there'll be a couple of these guys who'll find a way to be playing club cricket in England at the right time, just in case. Back to what you were saying about, I just don't really see why Blundell's in the squad. I mean, this is a worst case scenario again, like you're right. It's a worst case scenario, it's probably not going to happen. But I suspect that Blundell would be replaced by the replacement in that situation, and it's just while we're talking about clarity with the leg spinners, I'm not sure there's a lot of clarity on that role. I don't know. Would you go along with that theory? Do you think I'm betting at something there?
Yeah, well, then it also becomes a question of BJ Watling versus Tom Blundell for this role. Who would you rather have? I think like 90% of people are going to say BJ Watling.
Yeah, bit of experience.
Like if we get over the
more ODI cricket,
if we get over like my idea of using that 15th spot for someone who can add value into the like game day rotation, if we throw that aside and it becomes the 15th spot is going to a wicketkeeper, mandatory. If Tim Seifert is unavailable, or even if Tim Seifert is available, BJ Watling is still, like, if not the strongest character for that role. Like, he's experienced. He can open the batting if you need him to. Like, he can bat anywhere in the batting lineup, and he is New Zealand's best wicketkeeper. Like, the idea that Tom Blundell has been selected ahead of BJ Watling for the 15th World Cup spot is a bit weird, considering what we know about BJ Watling's batting overall. I get that many people don't view BJ Watling as like an ODI batsman because he doesn't really give it a good tonk in ODI cricket. But if we're talking about batting cover as the 15th squad member, BJ Watling can genuinely open the batting in ODI cricket and do a job if required. And he is the Test wicketkeeper. So even just that direct head-to-head, BJ Watling versus Tom Blundell, it doesn't make much sense there either.
And also, it's not like BJ Watling. He hasn't played a lot of ODI cricket for the last 5 years or so, but he did have a little bit of. It's easy to forget he came into the scene. He wasn't a wicketkeeper. He was an opening batsman. He was a fella who was, he opened the batting in Test matches, and he had a good little spell in the ODI stuff as well, and that didn't stick. But it wasn't that long ago he was last picked for an ODI squad. I think it was, only maybe 2 years ago he was unexpectedly called up for one of them, and I can't remember if he played. He might have been injured and had to pull out or something like that. I forget. But there was a squad in the recent memory where he got called up. So it's not completely out of the blue if that were to happen. And if it's going to be out of the blue for anyone because they don't have another wicketkeeper that's been primed for this role because Seifert got injured at the time when Seifert would have gone. And I'm fully on board with picking a backup wicketkeeper if you're going to have someone like Latham keeping the gloves, because I just think it's a good safety first way of using your squad. It's just that I'm not sure they've used it in a way that is actually going to be practical. And a similar idea, I don't know if this is one that would have caught too many people at the time, but I wonder, because I don't think the first 11 is as shady as you sort of hinted at before, because I think there's probably at least 8 of those positions which are locked in. Like, we know Guptill's going to be opening, Williamson, Taylor, Latham, probably Neesham at 6. I mean, there's a lot of probablys. We don't know for certain, but whereas some, teams like England, we know exactly what they're probably going to be going with. Well, we know exactly what they're going to be going with. I don't want to talk over my own words here. India as well is a team that's pretty well sorted. Funny enough, these are the 2 teams that are the favourites to win the tournament. So probably not a coincidence, that one. We know Bolt, Sodhi, I'd say Ferguson. Santner is not 100%, but we know it's close. Like, we've got a good idea. We don't have a certain idea, which we should have by now, but we at least have a fairly close one. The one thing I think there is, there's a debate over whether Sodhi should, be in the first 11 or not, and there's a debate over probably Neesham, or do you want someone who's a stronger bowler or whatever, or do you need that hitting power? I love him as a finisher, as a batsman, so I want Neesham at number 6 in every single one of these games. But there's a little bit of debate there. There's also, I'm not sure, the other opening spot. So we had Colin Munro for a long time pushing that one, and just in recent games, Henry Nicholls has come in, and Henry Nicholls has played so well over the summer that he's almost like you just got to have him in there. And I think that's what they were thinking when they pushed him to open. So it's leaning towards Nicholls as the opener for the World Cup, and if that's the case, if Colin Munro's not first 11, is it worth taking Colin Munro? Or should you pick a guy who can bat 1 through 6, like potentially Will Young? Like, would that be just a better use of a squad position, because an injury could happen anywhere? I suppose what would happen if someone got into, say, Kane Williamson got hurt as Nicholls had dropped to 3 and Munro comes into open. But I'm not 100% certain that that's the best way of... because then Nicholls has been preparing to open, and now he's having to bat in the top order instead. Like, it's just... I'm not sure that's the best use of a squad position in that one as well. And Blundell's selection is the one that cops the heat from a lot of people. I think Munro's selection is a little bit risky too, personally.
Rightio, so we'll probably wrap it up fairly soon, and it's interesting you raised BJ Watling, because I'm going to go right about the journey to selecting Tom Blundell. So BJ Watling was selected in the ODI squad to go to the United Arab Emirates.
That's the one, yeah.
Against Pakistan. Conveniently, around the same time when BJ Watling was on the selection panel to select the coach.
Yeah, that's right.
So he came out of nowhere to be selected in the ODI squad at the same time that he came out of nowhere to have this major power play position in New Zealand cricket, which was a bit weird considering where we are now, and he's not even in the contention for the World Cup squad. So he was in that squad. there were a few things like, I think Tom Blundell played one game for the New Zealand A team with BJ Watling and Tim Seifert in the same team more often than not. I think they played 3 games and Watling batted twice, Seifert was there twice, Tom Blundell was there once, I think, off the top of my head. And then obviously we came back to New Zealand and it was Tom Latham or Tim Seifert. And Tom Blundell was nowhere to be found. The idea, so I think what the Blackcaps are doing, because there was a series between England and West Indies earlier this year, a month or two ago, and runs were just absolutely pissing out of both teams. Like 300, 400, whatever you want, take it. And I think a lot of this World Cup is going to revolve around runs, which for me always comes back to bowling. Like if we're talking about runs, we're talking about wickets, because wickets stops runs. So you want to select as many wicket-taking options, the most dangerous, lethal bowling attack you can. That is the best way, in my mind, to counteract teams scoring 300. It's not, as we saw with the Champions Trophy, there was this mindset that we need a powerful batting lineup to score 300 plus, and that's why you had Jimmy Neesham and Corey Anderson selected in that middle order, because it was all about power, it was all about big hitting. And this idea that you counter fire with fire, for a team like New Zealand that maybe lacks the depth and resource of the other nations, fire with fire doesn't really work, and I'd prefer that they focus a bit more of their attention, not all of their attention, but a bit more of their attention into taking 10 wickets to stop the other team scoring 300 runs. But what I think is happening is that Colin Munro is there because Colin Munro has the potential to play a major factor. Now, it's debatable whether that is true. It's debatable whether how often that's true.
Yeah, potential is a funny word.
Perception is that he can give it a whack at the top of the order and get the innings started. And I think it's just so clear that he will probably actually open in game 1.
You reckon?
I think it's going to happen because of that perception that they need to score runs. And
well, if he does, that'll be why. You're right.
I just think they're going to go down that route, and Henry Nicholls is there as cover to open. I think he'll play a key role in the middle order as well, but I think they're going to start the tournament with Colin Munro, and if Colin Munro gets his confidence down, he gets his knickers in a twist, as we saw in the Kiwi summer with a couple of low-key, like really weird instances, which can happen to anyone when they're down in form and whatnot. I think they're going to give first crack because there's 10 games. So you can give Colin Munro the first opportunity, and if it's not working out, then you can bring in Henry Nicholls to open and change that look just a little bit. So I think Colin Munro has been selected, but I don't think Colin Munro has been selected as batting cover as a few people have labelled it. I think Colin Munro is a genuine chance of opening the batting in game 1.
Well, I hope he is, because if he is, then that undoes what I was saying. Like, that takes away that sort of, like, oddity of selection. But at the same time, I also just think Henry Nicholls is the much more reliable player at this point in time. So, yeah, I'm not sure that's a perfect situation either way. But, yeah, whatever, it is what it is. What are we looking at with that first 11 then? Like, what do you reckon? What do you think right now is the first 11 that will play at the first game at the World Cup for the Blackcaps?
The first 11 that I believe will be selected?
Yes, what they will pick.
I reckon you've got Maran Gapigaptu, Colin Munro, Kane Williamson, Ross Taylor, Tom Latham, Henry Nicholls, Jimmy Neesham, which is Neesham is 7.
7, yep.
Mitchell Santner, number 8. I think you're going to have Tim Southey and Trent Boult. I don't know the batting, but that's 2 more, so that takes us to 10, and then you've got 1 more. If it was me, I'd select Sodhi. it's not me, so it will probably be Lockie Ferguson.
Yep, I think Ferguson will definitely play. I just don't see how you don't pick him after he's had a very good summer and he's going to England where things should be all right for him. You got to bank on Tim Southey being solid, and also you need regardless of Southey's relatively rubbish last couple of years in ODIs, you need him because he's a death bowler and who else is there. But I also think it'd just be such an advantage to have Sodhi in there because he can also bowl at the death because he's a very good 2020 player. He can bowl extremely well to guys who are trying to hit him out of the park. And at this World Cup, like you said, lots of runs are going to be scored. It's okay to leak a couple big boundaries now and then. You can afford to go for some runs if you are threatening to take wickets. So I think personally I'm leaning towards, and I can 100% see them stacking the batting lineup, having Neesham at 7. What I would do is I think Nichols to open, Munro out of there, Sodhi comes in, everyone else slides up one up until about Bolt and Ferguson, Sodhi at 9. There you go. I think that would be their best one. I'm also not 100% sure that Mitchell Santner, who hasn't looked the same since he came back from injury, I think it was his knee, wasn't it? Something like that. Hasn't looked the same since he came back. Not 100% sure he's a lock for game 1. Or indeed all through the tournament.
Yeah, my perception of a lot of that refers back to the Colin Munro situation. I think they're going to play it very safe in terms of selection in the first few games, and they'll see. So I think Mitchell Santner will be given the first opportunity, and then we'll go from there. Like you, I am actually rather down on Mitchell Santner's Blackcaps future, to be honest. Across all formats, it's hard to see Mitchell Santner coming in as the number 1 test spinner anytime soon, given what we have in terms of spinning depth in New Zealand. I think it's going to be a very difficult road ahead for Mitchell Santner in the ODI team. Obviously, this depends on his performances. And it depends whether you think Mitchell Santner can have a big World Cup and put everything to rest. Just tell everyone, yo, I'm here. I ain't going nowhere. I don't know if Mitchell Santner's going to do that. There's nothing to make you think Mitchell Santner is definitely going to do that.
If you take the batting aspect out of the question, because in the team that you picked, Santner would have been batting at 8. And if he's coming in at 8, I don't want the Blackcaps, more than 5 wickets down going into the last 15 overs of an innings. In which case, if batting at 8 means you're not coming in until the last 10 to 15 overs of a game, I don't really mind Tim Southey coming in at that position. Tim Southey might not bat for a long time, but he bats for a good time, so he'll score some runs. I don't know that Santner is the guy who can just put the ball to the boundary at the time and turn over the strike on the bad balls kind of thing. I'm not sure he's the guy that can do that batting at that stage of the inning. So if he's going to bat at 8, I'm not sure the batting matters at all. In which case, head-to-head bowling, which do you want? This is the actual situation, the one they tossed up between Astle and Sodhi, the none for 45 versus 4 for 60 kind of thing, or 1 for 45, let's say, just to be nice. This is the actual battle between those, isn't it? Because it's Santner who probably could get 1 for 45 and Sodhi who probably could get 4 for 60 or 4 for 70 or something like that. And if they've picked Sodhi over Astle based on that idea, then I wonder if they might not pick him over Santner on the same logic, just like an extension of that thought.
Yeah, or Mitchell Santner versus Matt Henry.
Yeah, fair enough too.
Those are
Matt Henry's very good in England.
The spinner versus spinner idea, no, it's whoever's the most, the idea that you need 1 spinner, or you need 2 spinners, or you need 3 seamers. No, you need the best bowlers.
Which could be 5 seamers.
Yeah, among those best bowlers, you need 2 or 3 who are decent at batting, who can whack a boundary, which I think all of them can do. So it's not really a whole discussion. You know how I feel about Mitchell Santner's batting. I think he is better suited, just as a pure batsman, to batting high up the order in long form cricket than he is batting low down the order in short form cricket.
100%.
Again, in terms of accessing the boundary, I have seen Ish Sodhi do that a whole lot more and be a whole lot more effective than Mitchell Santner. But in terms of being a batsman, having time to work his way into an innings and moving the ball around, just playing shots, better judgment, Mitchell Santner's a better batsman. But to come in at number 8 or 9 in the 45th over, like you said, you got to hit a boundary or two, and you just need that simple mindset of I'm going to whack a boundary, which Matt Henry, Tim Southee, Ish Sodhi, their game is a whole lot more simple, and I think that's why they kind of are more effective in those roles than we have seen Mitchell Santner, because to be honest, Mitchell Santner it's not necessarily what you think. I think it's more of a case of what he has shown in international cricket. He is, in the international arena, he's a okay batsman and he's a okay solid spinner. He's not a super duper amazing standout X-factor performer in either regard. So it just depends what you want in those situations.
Last thought then, how are you feeling about the Blackcaps' chances?
Reasonably unconfident. I think they will have dark horse potential, but I don't think they have the same potential as the West Indies, for example. The possibility of the West Indies just being absolutely amazing is higher than the Blackcaps being absolutely amazing. And I think they're similarly ranked. Like, the West Indies are probably starting this World Cup behind New Zealand. But the ceiling for the West Indies is a lot higher than New Zealand. And to a lesser extent, I think Afghanistan, I think they have like more potential. I think Bangladesh to some extent, no, lesser extent, like I think they're kind of, but like Afghanistan are a bit more volatile. Like they could just rise to the occasion and just perform amazingly.
Best leg spinner in the world.
Indeed. So I think like teams like Pakistan, West Indies, I think they have more ceiling, greater upside than the Blackcaps, let alone India, South Africa, Australia, England, who are going to be the best teams at this World Cup. So I just think the Blackcaps are in no man's land. I think they're not among the powerhouse teams, and I think they're a better dark horse contenders than the Blackcaps, which leaves the Blackcaps as like a, if you got that team kind of scheme, I reckon the Blackcaps, they sit in the middle. They sit kind of 5, 6, maybe 5th or 6th, I think, like overall. But the teams below them, probably Pakistan and West Indies, have greater potential to blast through this tournament.
Pakistan and especially West Indies are all or nothing teams, aren't they? Like, they could be unbelievable or they could just be awful.
Yeah.
Like, the way they're poised for this tournament.
But their unbelievable is a lot more, is a lot better than the Blackcaps. And I think that just leaves the Blackcaps outside of the upper echelon. And if you're outside of the upper echelon, you better have that immense X factor. That means that if you catch fire at this World Cup, you can go all the way. And the Blackcaps have that potential, just not as much as Pakistan or West Indies.
I'm relatively confident, I think. I'm not sure if confidence is the right word, because it's not that I expect them to make the semi-finals here, because, you know, there's some good teams and the Blackcaps maybe aren't poised in that right position, and they do lack that X factor that was brought to them last tournament by Brendan McCullum at the top of the order, and also as a captain, let's be honest. And yeah, it's easy to see where they lack, and a lot of other teams do have that, like, toss a coin, are they going to be brilliant or terrible? Well, if they're brilliant, then the Blackcaps don't have a shot, because they can't keep up with that. But if teams do struggle, and England can be a tricky place to tour sometime, especially for a lot of those subcontinent teams, I don't know, I think if the Blackcaps can keep it sort of steady, then they can win enough games where they're pushing for a semi-final spot. And I think it's going to depend, regardless of what we've said about some of these fringe like selection type situations with the first 11. What matters most of all is that Kane Williamson, Ross Taylor score runs, and let's chuck Martin Guptill in there as well, because he probably needs to. Got to start off well, and that Trent Boult takes wickets. I think that, if you can get your four most, I don't really want to use the word elite because things are up and down, but your four most storied kind of like hyped up players in the squad, if they're all performing, that's what's going to matter for the Blackcaps, and those other role players will fit in around them where they need to. Jimmy Neesham will hit a couple sixes where he needs to. Tim Southey will chip in with a four in the game that he needs to, kind of thing, as long as the other guys are doing their job around them. And whether or not that happens, tough to say, but Williamson and Taylor are both in pretty decent nick coming into this tournament. Trent Boult hasn't had a bad innings for a very long time. He's always chipping away with wickets. Guppy is a little up and down. He's probably the one where this maybe this rests on. If he can like really lock in, then that could be the difference between the Blackcaps making the semis and not. But I don't know. I think they're in a pretty solid position just because they do have that strong core to their team, even if some of the other things are a little bit iffy.
Roger Dodger Wildcard. We'll wrap it up there for this Blackcaps episode of the Nichecast. We'll be back later in the week with a couple of other sporting discussions from the land of the long white cloud that you can have a gaze of, have a listen, and do as you please. And yeah, otherwise just support us on the Patreon. Support the Nichecast. Read the Nichecast. Tell a friend. Tell your auntie. And we will be back later in the week to drop some more Kiwi sporting knowledge and keep it funky for you. See you later, alligator.